Now it's Sunday, and we are here sitting with Kelly from the Interventionistische Linke, and we will try to do a reconstruction of the 2 days of actions here in Blockupy Frankfurt. Let's start from the day one, right? About the action day of Friday. Do you want to start by giving a general overview of the day's actions?
Sure. So Friday was the day where we planned to blockade the European Central Bank, which meant leaving the camp and moving together to the city center where the European Central Bank is located in the financial district. And for the afternoon, we had a series of other actions planned. The idea was to sort of identify different companies, corporations, financial institutions, other political institutions who are in some way either profiting from or profiting from the crisis policies or implementing these. So I can I guess I'll just go through the day chronologically. It began at 4 a.m. when someone came through the camp with a megaphone saying time to get up. We had a plenary the evening before, an action plenary where we all came together and decided how we would sort of build groups to move collectively to the city center. So we had 3 main groups that would be moving to the middle from the camp. We also had points of assembly in the city, at the train station and at Paulusplatz in the older part of Frankfurt, where locals and other people who traveled on the day of action came, and then they moved from those points to the ECB. So at 5 o'clock, we all sort of got into line and started moving. And we really weren't even sure if we would be able to make it out of the camp, like how the repression would be. The day before, there were really a lot of police around the camp, and it was quite uncertain. But we made it through the first point where we thought we might have problems. We made it out of the camp. We made it onto the main street leading to the city center. And after a while, it became clear that we were having like a pretty smooth movement. The police were there, but they were more just around and not in large numbers. So we made it to the ECB. We had 7 points of blockade around the ECB, which means that not only the European Central Bank was blocked, that people couldn't go to their workplaces, but also hundreds of other financial institutions which are in this part of the city. There were, I think, 2 small gaps where some people were still going through and could go to their workplaces, but for all main purposes, the city was shut down. So we really think that we reached our goal with having a practical blockade, like an effective block of capital flow in this part of the city, which is great. And we stayed in the blockades until about, I think, 10:30. It was raining the whole time. And then we assembled again in a different part of the city, came together where there was a community kitchen with food for everyone, and dispersed again. We had in the afternoon an action at the Frankfurt airport, Rhein-Main airport, which is the biggest it's the airport in Germany from which the most deportations take place. And the idea there was to go into the terminal and blockupy Terminal 1 against Lufthansa, which is the main airline doing deportations, and also against the air control. And this was also 1.5 weeks ago, we commemorated the 20-year anniversary of the end of asylum, of the end of right to asylum in Germany. So 1 week later, having sort of a practical action against that is good. We were joined by refugees without papers who found it very important also to be part of the action, who traveled from Berlin. Some of the refugees from Berlin didn't make it here because the police turned them away on the highway. And there was quite a bit of police repression in the airport, but I think still it was a good step. Also towards showing sort of the connections between the the methods that the German state uses in deportation and their crisis management, because they're forcing policies of austerity in Southern Europe, and at the same time, through the Dublin II laws, saying that Greece, Italy, Spain are responsible for basically taking all the refugees who first set foot in these countries, which means also providing social services that are no longer possible because of the very policies that Germany is pushing. So by deporting people from Germany, they're deporting them into impoverishment, into, deathly situations, hunger, homelessness, huge health problems, etc. We also had an action on the Zeil. The Zeil is the biggest shopping area in Frankfurt, and it's also the shopping area in Germany where, with the most revenues per day. So, it's a huge commercial area. And the idea there also was to blockupy Zeil, so to go in and stop the flow of business. And I think this action was a particular success of Blockupy this year, because we really were able to experiment with new forms, with much more participatory forms of action, also with engaging passers-by, bringing people into the action, coming into conversation. I can't believe how many people in the Zeil came to me during this action and asked, what are you doing, what's going on here? And we had a lot of info material to spread, and I think it was really a good point. And to be honest, we really weren't sure how many people would come to this action. Even after we left Pausplatz, after we met after the ECB, it looked like maybe a couple hundred of people at the most were coming to the Zeil. But I think an hour or so later, it was full of people. It just kept growing and growing, and what we ended up doing was there were different actions going on the whole time. I don't think any one person can reconstruct what happened. There was a care mob where there was a rally sort of about a crisis of reproduction, about gender, the gender division of labor, and sort of a double burden on women in crisis. And there were also go-ins into different stores. The first sort of target of the Zeil action was Primark, and it was sort of especially relevant to do this action now after 1,700 people died just weeks ago in Bangladesh, in a factory, and that collapsed in flames. And in Frankfurt at the same time, there's labor struggles going on right now in the retail sector. So it was sort of a way to bring these points together and to sort of think, even sort of be able to visualize a global, chain of exploitation. And their organization in Zara and in H&M in Frankfurt, so amongst the workers. So it was really nice. Actually, also Karstadt, a big department store in Germany, they were on strike as well. So there was kind of a big convergence of labor struggles, of also global things. And that was a very dynamic, participatory action. There were, I think in total, maybe 10 to 15 stores were blockaded with sit-ins in the street. There were also go-ins and different things going on. And I'll just really briefly say that I've been talking so long. There was also a right to the city action.
No, let me ask a question about the Zeil. Let's stay for this for a second. Because you said something like 15 shops were blockaded. I would like to focus on that a little bit, because I think the numbers are even more, and because after it got a little bit stopped for a while at least, and I left the place, it seemed to me that the whole shopping center was closed. They were not just blockaded, but they were a really successful series of, say, pickets, kind of new picket culture, which was really beautiful, and I totally agree with that being very open, participatory, and able to inspire anybody on the street to go join and go inside of the store with the people drumming songs. Nobody there was nothing, nobody was breaking anything, just going into the store and even in a way bonding in some places with the workers of the place. I remember going into Zara and getting these flying kisses from the workers of Zara when we were leaving. It was a really beautiful moment because it was not against any person, but it was against the capital and the chain of exploitation of which the people who are working in those places are also part of. So, yeah, so practically I think it wasn't a momentary blockade, but for that day it stopped the whole street.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So let's move on for the other actions of the second wave, this second wave.
Sure. Okay. I was in the side, so I can speak most in detail about that. But there was a right to the city action against a real estate fund. I mean, that was sort of the marking point of it, and that was a big success too. They took a bunch of foam, stones out of foam, and put it on the wall of this real estate. I mean, against speculation, there's a right to a city movement in Frankfurt. There's a big one in Berlin. There's a big one in Hamburg. All over Germany, rents are increasing and the wages are not. And more people are being forced to leave the city center, which also has a big racist dimension. A lot of minorities being forced out of neighborhoods where they've lived for a very long time. So there were a lot of people who went to that too, and for whom that was also just a very personal, I think, identification. And finally, there was an action in front of Deutsche Bank, also against land grabbing and food and land speculation in the global south. So again, trying to really show the global dimension of the crisis, the global dimension of exploitation, and of, basically how capital ruins the lives of people all over the world, and how the decisions that are made in this one city, Frankfurt, have this global scale. And I think through all of these actions, we really managed this year to kind of sort of show, or in the actions, express sort of the complexity of the situation by kind of showing all the different faces of what we're protesting against and the different qualities of it, and sort of also trying to have different forms of action, for different targets. The ECB blockade was really, we were in the streets standing and just preventing people from being able to move throughout the city. In the tile, we used much more sort of creative and open and sort of colorful methods, right?
Yeah, it was a success in many senses, in the sense of being able to disrupt what was the plan to be disrupted, but also in the methodological sense. I also saw it and felt it as a really great success. And so yeah, it's a little bit sad now we have to move on to the next day, mm-hmm. which was totally another story, and which in my opinion really diminishes the focus of the action to the things that are not the general focus. Okay, we now move on to talk about the police repression and police brutality of yesterday, the Saturday of the big demonstration, which was set up to started after 12 o'clock from Basler Platz. Can you give a brief overview what happened right away after the kicking off of the demonstration?
Sure. So after the rally at the beginning at Basler Platz, we were lined up in the demonstration. We were 20,000 people. We were colorful and loud, and I think there was a really good sort of feeling in the demonstration. People were excited to march. We had at the beginning of the demonstration sort of like the representative block of the coalition, so people from all different organizations and collectives that are working with Blockupy. After that, we were in different demonstration blocks. So the first one that came was an anti-capitalist block, and I think behind us was a care block, and then there were others, organizations, Attack and the Left Party, etc. The anti-capitalist bloc was organized together by Umsganse, like a radical left coalition in Germany, and EL, another radical left network or organization. And well, the demonstration began, and 500 meters later it ended. Suddenly, the police came in between the representative bloc and the anti-capitalist bloc. There was a little bit of space because the representative bloc they weren't marching in, organized lines together. So I think a couple hundred police came in, armed RoboCops, and of course we can't keep going when they're standing there with their huge sticks, and so we stopped and waited, and we ended up waiting for hours, not knowing exactly what to do, demanding that we continue. The demonstration was legalized, the route was legal. There was a sort of conflict in the days right before Blockupy because the coalition applied for a certain demonstration route which would go right past the European Central Bank. It was initially rejected. Initially it went through. It was everything was okay. We were set to go, and the Frankfurt police, which has a conflict now with the Social Democrats in Frankfurt, and now the mayor, different to last year where there was a conservative Christian Democrat mayor. Now there's a Social Democrat mayor in Frankfurt, and there's a conflict between the police and these Social Democrats. So the city had approved the demo route. The police basically filed in the court to say to complain, to say that we shouldn't have it. And in the first instance, the police's complaint was upheld. So we were given a different demonstration route, which wouldn't let us march next to the ECB, which, we're organizing this huge demonstration to protest against the ECB, and it makes sense to sort of go past this act, this institution, this building, symbolically. So, anyways, then the coalition took it to another court, and it was overturned. So we got the original route back. The police were pissed off because, it's like a power game, who's on the power, who can decide what happens in Frankfurt. So, it was very clear that that they just didn't want us to march. They had this whole thing set up, these people ready. 500 meters later, nothing had happened. In the end, they said that the reason that they stopped the demonstration was because people in the anti-capitalist bloc were masked. I read in a newspaper yesterday in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung that the masks were because of umbrellas and sunglasses. It was supposed to rain yesterday, so we can look into whether an umbrella counts as a mask in a demonstration. In any case, there really were no problems. It was a peaceful demonstration. We wanted to protest against ECB and the Troika, and we weren't able to go farther. So after we decided in the bloc, we're absolutely staying together. We're not letting individuals get pulled out by the police. We're not letting individuals be identified by the police or controlled for identity. The police took refugees out of the demonstration. Luckily, they were set free again in the evening, but they were detained for hours yesterday for absolutely no cause. they went into the back of the anti-capitalist block. I don't even really know everything that happened, but I mean, I know they went into the demonstration with pepper spray. They went into...
Yeah, just to draw the picture, because you said that they stopped the head, but just to make it clearer that there was like a big kettle, so they cut it in two places and left the anti-capitalist bloc separated from the rest of the group, both the representative head and the rest of the big demo that was in the beginning, 20,000 people. And in total, if you don't have these counts, talking with the demonstration medics yesterday, there has been in total 200 injured yesterday by pepper spray and beatings.
Right. So the police separated the demonstration, and ultimately it led to, since we said we're not leaving unless we can leave together and that we want to march further, that they tried to come in to the block. So, I mean, I can speak for the anti-capitalist block. I think you saw more because you were actually moving around and I was in the kettle the whole time. But, I mean, it took a very long time. The police were very uncertain of what to do, I think. You know, they came forward and went back again like 3 or 4 times. We had parliamentarians from the left party and other people from different organizations from Hesse, from, you know, the regional and also from, or the state and also from the federal government, who were there, you know, in standing in front of our block. Between us and the police, there were probably 30 or 40 people from Stuttgart, from these Stuttgart 21, Stuttgart 21 protests. I mean, a lot of people came and stood between us and the police. People from the theater, the Frankfurt, you know, the city theater, which was right next to where the kettle was, were giving us water. There was a lot of support from the city. And on the other side of the police, there were a lot of people who came, like, just from the city, showing their support, trying to somehow support us on the other side of the police. But despite this sort of popular support for Blockupy, despite the fact that there were 20,000 people wanting to demonstrate, plus all of the locals who came out in support, the police ended up charging our block and beating us. So you can see walking around the camp today, people with black eyes, with, you know, bloody noses, with scratches. There were people who were sent to the hospital. Someone was unconscious. And that's, yeah. So, I mean, it's really a shame because, as you said at the beginning, it totally changed the dynamic into a confrontation against the police, and no longer were we really sort of thinking about our own movement, about what we're protesting against actually, against what we're doing together, how we're sort of bringing ourselves together and what we're trying to do with that. But just being carried away, beaten and carried away by the police one by one. And it's quite complex, I think, because, I mean, there are many questions about what to do in this kind of a situation and sort of who needs to be protected. And but I think it's definitely something that we're going to have to evaluate in a lot of detail, how sort of you can be better prepared for something like that, and also just sort of what other options are available when something like this happens to make continue the protest or somehow make it productive for all of these people who are there, because in the end, 20,000 people, we really weren't able to organize ourselves and to turn it into a productive situation for ourselves, even though there was a really great feeling the whole time. And even, literally 12 hours after the demonstration started, at midnight, there was a demonstration that did end up taking place with a few thousand people. But
I think that precisely because these kind of events, like the events of yesterday, are the ones that easily diminish the whole form of protest and the movement into thinking and forcefully experiencing the violence of the state, which is increasingly becoming the violence of the capital, like in a straightforward manner. I think it's really important that we try to also remember and talk about the positive experiences inside of them, and that's why I wanted to make a little recollection of all the forms of solidarity and doing together that were present, like you said already, even inside of the big kettle, which was separated by huge hordes of police. I mean, like thousands of police for the few hundred that were inside, like a huge army. But that's not the point to concentrate on, but rather on the fact, like, there was people were giving us water, people were throwing toilet paper. Because you said that you think that the police didn't know what they did. I personally think that they knew very well what they were doing, because they are tiring people in that way. They can wait for hours because they can change shifts and they get lunch. They have lunch breaks. So I think that was a really well planned strategy of taking out all the energy of the people and then being able to separate them from each other. But we built an improvised toilet. We got paper from the people on the building, toilet paper. When I got out of the blockade, I saw these groups of people, like 20 people at once, being pepper sprayed, crying and vomiting in all the corners. And there were local people who came to help them with water bottles, washing their eyes. And this is like even though the situation is horrible, it's a beautiful sight to see that it's obvious that even the locals are there to help for the people who have to face this brutality. So I think we could now move on to this question that you already were coming closer, which is the question of, well, in the big scale of the methodologies of social protest, practically how to create that kind of forms of protesting together that have less probability of ending up in that conflictual position where we were something like 10 hours yesterday. It was a very long day, and it was a full on, I mean, it was a confrontational and conflictual at all moments, and of course we did not start it, but in my opinion we were not able to turn it other way around either. And that's why I would like to ask a question about possible views, also from the side of the organizational structure in which you are taking part, of evaluation of the methods of street protest and coming together of many different movements here in Frankfurt. Maybe the first one, and the one that became most present for me, being inside of the block, was the need to take the imminent pressure of there being so many very, very heavily vested and robocops. Like it's even hard to think about humans anymore because they are so machine-like. To take the imminent pressure of being under that brutal presence away, the proposal of doing assemblies inside of the kettle to concentrate on anything else. How do you see the situation of using that kind of method here in Blockupy or within the different parts of the coalition?
Yeah. I really can't speak about the situation in the block yesterday. I haven't had any time to speak with people who are in the organization, for what reasons there might have been that didn't take place yesterday. But in terms of just in the Blockupy coalition and sort of using the method of assemblies, I think it's been an interesting year, sort of, in developing sort of new forms or kind of bringing them in, thinking about new ways of like collectively sort of, or even like collecting ourselves in a way and bringing ourselves together and seeing kind of like constituting ourselves as something more than just a coalition. Even the meetings of the coalition this year were totally, they were quite interesting because I think we had two main meetings in 2013 before Blockupy in Frankfurt, and each time there were, I think, 200 people present. We all sat in a big room, and it literally was, it was a big assembly. We, even at, I think, the second to last meeting, we collectively in this huge, room with so many people discussed the call text for Blockupy. People raising their hand, this word I don't like, this word I don't like, and imagining this kind of situation beforehand, whether we can discuss this very sensitive political text with so many people. I would have thought absolutely not. There needs to be another solution, but it worked so well. And it was a really beautiful experience for everyone, I think. And it's really cool sort of having these spaces. And there is sort of there's a coordination circle of Blockupy of a smaller number of people who on a weekly basis talk and figure everything out. But in these meetings, there really was this horizontal element. It really was the case that everyone came together and we talked together about how we want how we want it to be this year, what political message we're trying to send, etc. So that's one thing that I think is quite interesting, and I think will continue to develop more as the coalition hopefully also continues to broaden. And a second thing is that this year we decided instead of doing a closing rally after the demonstration, which is, the very traditional thing of the stage and some famous politicians or whoever come and talk and nobody listens and people maybe like drink beer, we decided we wanted to do assemblies, that we wanted to do 10 different assemblies. We thought we'll do 8 in German and 2 in English and just kind of see what the needs are, but also do them in English. And sort of try to create, sort of planting a seed was, I think, what the idea was this year, because they were going to be limited. All of the buses driving people back to their cities were leaving that evening, and after a long demonstration, which is the second day of action after all the blockades and other actions on Friday, I don't think you can really expect to have, this really high quality maybe exchange. But we thought it would be really wonderful to sort of use this time not to sort of listen to someone on a stage, but to sit down together and talk, how are these past days? How do we want to judge it politically? How do we want to continue working on this? What are we going to do when we go back to our cities? When are we going to come together the next time, etc.? And it was a bit tricky in the coalition because it just doesn't fit into sort of a traditional concept of how a demonstration should be. And so there was some resistance. But in the end, it was brought through that this was how it was going to be after the demonstration. It was planned. And the Fels, the collective that I'm in Berlin, I think played a major part in bringing that in, trying to continue to develop our culture of protest. Is a very important thing that we're trying to do with Blockupy. Yeah, right. But the thing is that because of the repression, they didn't take place. And I think there's a little bit, there wasn't the kind of flexibility in the consciousness of all of us that even though the day yesterday didn't go as planned, maybe there still should be space for these kinds of assemblies. There was a Twitter at some point that assemblies were starting behind the kettle, not in the kettle, but behind it. And I don't really know to what extent they took place or how long. But it, it was sort of the thing is like, okay, this is the plan, we're going to have the demonstration, then we're going to have the assemblies, and because the demonstration doesn't work, then maybe we won't have the assemblies. And it's really a shame because we also had planned for yesterday, after these big assemblies, after, in the city, after the demonstration, to come back to the camp and then to have an international assembly where we specifically speak about the international dimension of Blockupy, and that also didn't take place, and it's such, it's a huge shame because we really had a lot of people here who I think need to have these discussions, and now it's too late. So,
yeah. Another important area or question that has come up about the methodologies of the protest, especially within the framework of intending to make Blockupy also a space for a transnational coming together of social struggles, has been one of, let's put it two-folded way, one of the doing media or recording things and making them travel in Europe, in internet, and the other one is one of the translation. If we start from the part of the filming, it has been sometimes tricky to do that kind of work here in Blockupy. The general attitude towards activist media groups seems to be much more doubting, let's say, than in many other places. It's not the Spanish everybody take your camera when you go to the demo, but it's rather only take your camera if we already know you and we can be sure that you are trustworthy, which is very problematic when you're coming from some other place. You don't know the codes of how to be trustworthy by the first glance to seem obviously that you are one of us, and that makes it harder to transmit the struggles of other places to where we have come here, and also to other places because they should, in my opinion, be approachable to anybody. So during these days we have repeatedly thought that if I can't film, it's not my revolution. I mean, do you think there are historical facts. There has been home searches the last year in Berlin, in Germany, and taking away of people's computers and stuff like this, which has been used against people in the movement. What possibilities you see of also opening up these kind of questions and trying to make the forms of struggle open in a way that they can also be transmitted to other places, and so that people can then learn of the forms of action and also be part of reforming them, which is also a very important thing if Blockupy will try to make its organizational structure more open and more horizontal by each year or as an ongoing process.
Yeah, I think it's a bit complex. I think there are different things that play a factor, and there's no sort of one answer to why there's more resistance to filming. I can try to sort of go through different possibilities. Certainly what you said is probably the primary reason. I mean, the fact that there are experiences of repression here that make other people not want to have that similar experience. I mean, now in the past years there have been big blockades of Nazi marches in Dresden, and now, for example, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Now, for example, we have the person who was holding the megaphone during the blockades of the Nazi demonstrations in Dresden, like, for example, has a huge legal problem because it's officially like calling to an illegal action because you are holding the megaphone. Or also for Castro Schottern, like for the campaign against the blockades of the nuclear transports that happened some years in the past in Wendland. Like another person, the press spokesperson from the Interventionistische Linke also is now having like legal problems because of this. And it's something that people want to avoid, right? I mean, of course, there are people who choose to identify themselves. Others don't want to, but still, there's that. There are house searches. I mean, these are all concrete sort of things. At the same time, more than anywhere else that I know of, there's sort of a culture of data privacy in Germany. I mean, people who, for whatever reason, like, people they don't even have email accounts, like, with their names. I mean, just even kids. Kids. It's just a very sort of ingrained thing. Less people have smartphones than in a lot of other countries. Less people do Twitter. Less people are on Facebook, although that's growing now. So I think sort of in terms of like technological revolution, Germany is somehow like one step behind a lot of other countries where there have been these huge digital movements, and sort of a lot of organization has also taken place in a virtual space. I don't know if like there's even the technical capacity in Germany for that right now because not enough people have the access. But yes, and then at the same time, I mean, people from older generations of protests who have experienced even more state repression, who have sat in jail for years, who are also part of Blockupy. So we have to sort of figure out a way of bringing all these experiences together and figuring out a solution. At the same time, trying to be, I mean, as you're saying, like more open and transmit, being able to transmit what we're doing here and to the rest of the world. People are interested. I think at least this year, like we did a lot better with social media, and have a big presence there. And even for example, I do think it's changing a bit because, for example, we did this campaign this year for Blockupy, like My Crisis. We had these sort of sheets that said My Crisis, and then people wrote in their things, and it was sort of like, why am I going to Frankfurt this year? And then you hold it and take your picture and post it on Facebook. And a lot of people did it, and I was actually quite unsure about whether that would be successful because so many people don't want to be identified, that they're even going to Blockupy. So yes.
Okay, that's cool. The second theme that relates to the transmittance, to the traveling of the struggles, and also, in my opinion, to the whole, meaning of Blockupy. Because obviously the only level of why we are here is not the disobedience, the street action. It's not only that, otherwise there would not be plenaries or meetings or workshops planned in the way that they were planned. So obviously there is also, even though Blockupy obviously is focused on these actions more than, for example, the Agora that was first time arranged last year and will take place again next autumn, but there still seems to be obviously a need to also create spaces for making common notions about what is happening in different areas and talk together also here in Blockupy. So how do you think that the methodologies of translation could be improved within Blockupy? And I think here it's important to talk about both the practical methods of translating into one language to another, but also in translating in more general terms, like trying to relate our struggles in a way that can try to find a common point between some different struggles that come possibly even from the other end of Europe, or even beyond the borders of Europe.
Yeah. I think first in terms of the concrete, practical problem of translation.
Yeah, because practically, just to add, what have been the practical problem is, and this doesn't go only for Blockupy, but for many transnational meetings, that the method of this quiet translation during a German-speaking assembly isn't actually enabling the full participation of the people who are dependent on that translation.
Right. Yes, this is something we also experienced in Madrid, right?
Yeah.
I think it is a huge problem. I think there's sort of a tension on two sides between. We had sort of an international working group in the coalition trying to work, to see how many people are really coming from different countries, what are the needs, how can we best work with this. And it was a bit difficult because it was very, the communication wasn't always so clear, like how many people are really coming, and like is there really going to be this need or not. We knew definitely there was a need for Italian. But I mean, so that's on the one hand, sort of. I think it goes on both ends. Like also, people from other countries need to be sort of also part of the planning of how to implement that. But I totally agree that these quiet translations don't work, and that's the same tension though, because I mean the vast majority of the people here are coming from Germany, German speaking. Whether it then makes sense to switch. And I think it probably does, and it's an important step, sort of in order to make Blockupy more international. I mean, it also enables people who maybe even aren't here to have more access, because you can sort of write a description of it in English if it happened in English, etc. Right, and that was something that there was this sort of way it worked this year was that the main meetings would happen in German with translation on the side, and that there would be special sort of international spaces where things would be in English, and maybe like the next step towards internationalizing it more would be to have the main things be in English. And in terms of translating the struggles, there were like 150 people from northern Italy here, for example, and they were part of the anti-capitalist bloc. And I think, I think we actually during these days had some very like practical experiences of being together on the street and sort of struggling together in a very practical way and working together and sort of learning how to do that together, and it worked really, really well. That was a really cool experience to sort of, that there really wasn't a huge sort of difference. And I think a lot of these, but I think in terms of sort of maybe on a more analytical level, that's what didn't take place. I mean, there was no sort of analytical exchange, and I think that's what actually is missing and is extremely critical, because apart from some people here, I mean, I think it's a similar situation in a lot of places, but who are sort of trying to learn more about movements in other European countries, or sort of thinking more about a European level. There isn't that much awareness of sort of the other conversations, the debates, the analysis that's coming from other places. And I think, you can sort of see, I mean, you definitely see similarities between debates coming from Spain and from Italy, or at least there's a more historical, like, common tradition, or a common point of departure, maybe even. And I think, and then in Greece, where there's a different language, or vocabulary, I should say, they're using different terms, but they're meaning very frequently very similar things to what's going on in Spain. which is quite interesting. But because they're using different vocabulary, oftentimes there's more, you're lost in translation. Literally, you don't know if what they're saying is that kind of how I mean it, or is that something quite different, and do I want to support that or not? That's why these spaces are so important, because you can come together and sort of chat, match it up, and maybe also move beyond to sort of thinking about some common terms. And right.
I agree with you that it's totally crucial. That's like the most important thing, that the creation of that kind of spaces which are, let's say, created only for the purpose of doing that work of translation, both in the terms of making it understandable what are the relations between these vocabularies, what do we mean when we say this, and in another culture of struggle it means something different, and that's where time is needed and patience is needed. And my disappointment of the arranging of this camp is that there hasn't been an assembly that would have that open form, that it would only pretend to offer a space for transnational coming together of this and only this, but they have been rather strongly structured and not open mics for this. And then the linguistic question is also present, has been present the whole time, the lack of an English speaking space for discussion. So in general terms, I think that the how should I put it? I have been thinking about the relation of thinking, of planning, of strategies, of action, of protest in relation to the creation of methodologies of protest. I think there is an important path from one to another, and I think that it would be important to talk more about methodologies, because methodology is something that is tries to explain how something is being done, and why it is done the way it is done, why we are organizing the way we are organizing, and the organization form itself already means something, is a creation of a new kind of a world, a different way of living, instead of talking about strategies that oftentimes are exclusive, because they are more of a secrecy, because this is a long discussion and historical discussion of many things, but I mean, how does it sound to you to think more on methodologies than only strategies?
I think you're opening up a really interesting point, and I don't think I've thought about it in exactly these terms, but I would like to. And I think, my immediate reaction is absolutely. I think you're right. I mean, it's sort of like how to talk more about how we're coming together. I mean, the how, not the what, and that's what you're getting at, maybe. Yeah. And it's quite interesting.
And I mean, to make it more general, I think the feeling during these days and the most urgent thing to express about the forms of organization and thinking and acting together with such a like a diverse people, is that all the forms of doing that, all the organizational forms, should always bear in mind to look at what is happening from the side of minimizing and eventually destroying all the exclusive nature of the protest to make it more open for participation and also try to diminish the culture of doubt of doubt within us because that is creating, I think fear is the most like vivid weapon in the minds of the people when they go to the streets and want to protest together, and a culture of struggle that is full of doubt even within itself is very susceptible to fear at all times.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think in terms of, the past couple of days, what's happened in the camp, maybe the concrete situation just didn't allow for this form of assembly the whole time, which it has to do with the fact that, I think the meetings in the camp were very action oriented because that's what we did the first day, and that was important. There were so many different things planned, and I think it had more to do with the fact that the actions had been worked on, for months and planned in an open process. Like, we have these big Blockupy meetings that are open, they're public, everyone should come and is invited. And from these meetings, working groups form to prepare. And so we come together in the camp, with thousands of people are here who didn't necessarily work on the planning. And so it's more of a information transmission that needs to take place. And I don't know of a better way to do it than like, okay, so this is what we've planned. It was an open planning process, but like it's already been done, and it doesn't, it's impossible really at this point to say, have an open assembly about, so how do we, are we going to just throw away all of this plans because maybe someone, one person says, no, like I have a better idea. It just doesn't work that way. But and I think actually the tension too is something we've been talking about a lot. Is it possible to come together for actions and also have these spaces of exchange? And I think having the camp here this year was sort of a step in a good direction because, last year there was absolutely no space, right? We had no place to even assemble. This year we had the camp, but because we did the actions and the demonstration, there was just too little time to actually have this exchange. It was planned for yesterday evening, and I actually, it was prepared also through this open process, and a lot of people had written ideas about what to do, but it didn't take place because things went differently, the repression. And I think, we have to think more about how can we really, if we want to keep doing these actions, it's now the coalition wants to do it next year, how can we really actually create a space, to talk about methodologies, to talk about, what are we actually doing, how are we doing it, how do we want to do it, for the space for translation and the qualitative sense. How can we make this possible? I think we also saw in Madrid there were, even parallel to one another, so many different meetings going on. That was maybe its own problem, but there was no space there for sort of having some sort of collective experience in a public, space, doing some sort of action or having that kind of expression. So is it possible to have both? I think we still don't have an answer, but
Yeah, that is possibly the question. I think Agora isn't even going to exactly the direction of intending to do a street protest,
Yeah.
but it's rather focused on that coming together of different struggles. And the question still remains about what will become of Blockupy. Obviously in the time frame of 2 days and planned actions like they have been planned, there just is not enough energy for doing both, and like you said, with that kind of a structure, of course a meeting will be a passing on of information, and as such it is important to know what has been planned and in what kind of structure the action will happen, but basically it has nothing to do with an open assembly of coming together of different struggles. They are two totally different things.
Yeah, yes. But I think there's such potential to bring these things together because, for example, in Madrid we were talking about, how can we think about having some sort of European constituent process, right? And it would imply also having a destituent process. And I think for a lot of us from Germany, we heard that and we were thinking, okay, this is kind of what we're doing with Blockupy, is we're going to the Troika and we're saying no. Like, we don't want you, we're doing our own thing. So this moment, I think, also it relates almost directly to these kinds of conversations. And even in Madrid, we talked about it, that would be one step, to collective, to bring ourselves together and to go somewhere, and that would be a street protest, and to say no, even if it's a symbolic beginning of something. So I think that Blockupy could be an opportunity to have, that kind of a moment. Up to this point, there's relatively little participation from Spain in the entire process. There are a few individuals, but that's it. I think, but in terms of having this kind of process on a European level, I really think that Blockupy and the protests against the European Central Bank could be a platform sort of for being a much, much broader thing on a European scale. I think it's more a question of how we can get more people involved, from Spain, from Greece. Italy's doing a good job. But or do we want to go to Brussels? But these sort of moments of being on the street, I think everyone agreed to that's it's important.